me that anyone that wants to go up here will start by giving like a 3-minute spiel, okay? And they can talk about whatever you want for about 3 minutes. If you want to say something about, I'm going to start out with about a 3-minute discussion of some numbers of women in physics. And one thing that we do know is the numbers are very low and they're getting worse. And so maybe we can come up with an idea of how we can increase these numbers. And you're welcome to say something or not, but we only want 3 minutes apiece because there's so many up here. And then we want to open it up to get your ideas. So I'm going to start out with Rachel Ivey is the Director of Statistical Research at the American Institute of Physics. And she's done 2 major surveys, a global science survey and a global physics survey. And I just pulled out her part on women in physics. So what we have here is girls as a percentage of total enrollment in high school physics. We see it's about 50%, okay? And that hasn't changed much between, all high school students and high school physics students. So that's, it's reasonable. But then things change. So what we have here now is we notice, this is the class year, 76 through 2016. And what we see are that the percent of physics bachelors and PhDs earned by women through these years. And we see something that's very funny, that is very surprising that APS had found, well, AIP did the statistics, is that the number of women getting bachelor's degrees is decreasing. And no explanation at all. And then this is also interesting that the total number of bachelor's degrees earned in physics through these years is really growing rapidly. I know at University of Illinois we had to change some of the structure of some of our senior courses because of that. But we see that the women in physics aren't increasing as quickly. So that means that the percentage of women getting bachelor's degrees has gone down. Previously, it's always been that the studies that Rachel has done, it's been a leaky pipeline. Go to the AP website. So typically, the number of women that are lost in physics has been a leaky pipeline. There's not one place you can define. Now, for the first time, it was noticed a few years ago that we're losing people between this figure and this figure. This is all published, by the way. We're losing them at the bachelor's level. That's what I've been telling you. You're not listening to me. Okay.
We get the idea.
Yeah, I'm just going to go on. I don't want any details. You can look this up on the AP website. So this is another example. I don't know if I did this one already, but the fraction of women getting bachelor's degrees is going down. And this is, so now I just want to show you that the numbers in all fields are 50%. And if we look at biology, chemistry, even computer science, which has gone down, it's still higher than I expected it to be. Mathematics is going down, but physics and engineering are remaining very low. So I don't have an explanation. We certainly have talked about explanations. I think the most important thing we need to increase the number of women in physics is find a way to increase the number of women in physics. And I'm not going to say any more than that. Would you like to say anything else? Next? That's my 3 minutes.
Laura, go back to the data that shows PhDs and bachelors. What you see is the reason that the percentage has gone down. No, go back one more.
Yeah, exactly what I said. The percentage is gone down.
One more. The PhDs are going up irregularly, but going up. So it's not the number of women going down, it's the number of men going up that's caused that.
That's what I didn't obviously get across as clearly. I didn't get that across as clearly. The bottom line is the number of men getting bachelor's degrees in physics has risen substantially over the past few years. The number of women getting bachelor's in physics has not risen as quickly. So that's very interesting. I don't know, people speculate on the reasons we don't know. The bottom line is that the fraction of women in physics is typically about 20% since about 1920. It's a little lower now, depending on the field of physics. If you look at the demographics on the APS website, certain units have a higher fraction of physics than other units. I was really surprised that the new quantum information division is very, very low in women. So that's just very interesting. So we can argue climate, we can argue all kinds of things, but we're just here to say that there definitely are things that all minorities need to overcome to be successful, and we can think of ideas. Okay?
Well, this is America. This is the US.
No, this is,
This is the world or US?
No, you're right.
yeah, I think this is US. The world one isn't out yet.
So I don't know whether the situation is the same elsewhere.
I think it's drastically.
The middle is good. France, you think it's good. France must be good.
So what I could do, and I'm not going to access it right now, but a few years ago, Rachel did the global survey for physicists. And those numbers are posted on the web. I can get those to you. And it's a huge survey. I don't remember how many people. It was huge. And right now, I have helping with her doing another survey for scientists. And those data were supposed to be collected by the end of November, middle of December. And that will take a couple months for those to come out. So the one for physicists was a few years ago. I can get you that information. Ask if you don't want to look for it on the AP website, I'll find it for you. And that will be international. And it's very different between countries.
So, Laura, you had another slide which had other sciences, right?
Yeah.
So can we look at that? So they're not going down in other sciences.
Yeah, I know.
So is it that women are opting to go into other sciences?
I'm not going to speculate on this right now.
I mean, this is a useful data also, right?
So the one thing that I don't want to do, I've been on a number of these panels and meetings, etc., is that if you speculate as to the reasons why, you're always wrong. So we can speculate if we want later, but the bottom line is this is the case, and we would like your ideas how you think we can increase the number of women and, of course, minorities. The Bridge program at APS in the United States has been looking very successful to getting underrepresented minorities into graduate school in physics, and that's only for the U.S. But again, a lot of this stuff is the statistics of small numbers. So does anybody want to have any comments on how they think about what they've experienced, or how they would like to,
You just want to go down.
yeah.
No, start over there. Why don't you start? Start your number one.
Ava,
Come on.
You started talking.
I can start if you like.
So
I can start from here.
Okay, it's volunteer.
Okay. I'm not up there, but I can start from here because immediately this idea that we're losing students or female students at the bachelor level rings a bell with me, because I actually have quite a few female PhD students or master students, and we're all going to leave. I had to kind of talk them into staying, and their reason was that, well, it's not an appealing career. It seems extremely competitive. There's so much fighting for funding, so much individualistic behavior. There's the measures of success, who is successful or what is successful, are very narrow, and they don't find it appealing to set themselves up for the rest of their life in that kind of environment. So I then had to work on them and say, oh no, it's not like that, and there are many people who like to collaborate together, and you can have a really, great relationships with people all over the world doing, collaborative and good science. But I feel sometimes like I'm not really telling the truth. I'm trying to persuade them to stay because I think the situation will improve by the time they get to my stage, but I'm not always convinced that I'm really being honest with them. And I do see their point that the situation that they're heading into doesn't look that appealing at that stage, so they choose for a different career.
So what same for men?
Of course.
So why do men win?
I don't know.
But the arguments you are giving are not gender dependent. They apply for the men as well.
So I think that I agree with everything Alex said, and I think, whereas Laura said we're not looking just at gender, I think across the board we're selecting for a certain type of personality and we're claiming it's neutral, we're claiming it has nothing to do with personality or background, or I think that's not accurate. And I think we're self-selecting for people. Historically, there's been a certain kind of culture, and it's very insular, it's very competitive. The times I've wanted to leave, it's not because the physics was hard, it's because it's so unpleasant to be in such a combative environment where people are nice to each other. And it's not just women who think this way, there's a fraction of men who also leave. Of course, there's people who leave about, and I think what we're arguing for is not about having more women, it's about having a field that is actually inclusive and that people who are different types, different backgrounds, different personalities, all of them feel welcome and feel that it's not so, okay, so I'll use a few of my 2 minutes. So in entering physics, the times I want to leave is when people tell me you're not a serious physicist or you laugh too much. You've told me, Andrei, why are you laughing? And lots of people will say this image of this physicist with gravitas who's serious, who is it's a very certain personality type, who's combative, who's very assertive, that is promoted. And so when I say, well, is this the kind of person I want to be? Actually, it's not. And I think that we need to reevaluate what we define as a successful academic, as a successful physicist, who we welcome in this field, what it's inclusive toward. And I think we seriously need to reevaluate this.
Let me add one example to that. So I think I was at last ICM, and I think some others were as well. And there was a big prize ceremony. And, well, I mean, maybe it was a coincidence, but there were, I think, 4 or 5 males selected for the big prizes. And they gave their thanking speeches. And I think there were several in a row that showed how they worked day and night for their success and how they thanked their housewives at home for making it possible. And I felt I was very much turned off by this, but I discussed with others afterwards and they were all feeling the same. So that suggested really that in order to get a prize, a big prize, you have to obey to that scheme that you abandon the rest of your life. You work, you breathe, you eat for physics. Otherwise, it's hopeless. If you're not going to do that, well, it's maybe not your job, right? So, and I think that was an extreme case. I hope we will never see that again. But I fear that this has at least turned off, I don't know, 20 females listening, and they will never come back. So I think that's really how we measure success in physics is just not correct. It's not by quantity, it's not by working around the clock that you can make great physics. It's also by, for instance, part-time work. Why not? Why not raising a child and doing part-time work, have a great job, a great discovery? That's possible. It doesn't have to be 100 great discoveries. If you just do one in your life, it's great. And I think that should be valued much more than really this tough working around the clock mentality.
Can I add again that I agree that it's not just women who are put off by this. I mean, a lot of my colleagues who are also male say that they hate this environment too. But the slight difference is that there are a lot of men for them to look at, and they can see that there are many different types of men around and can relate to them. And it's very difficult to see a path for yourself if there's nobody already along that path that you can relate to. So although it's off-putting for just certain personality types, men have a bigger pool of people to look at to find a way for themselves, and women don't have that yet.
So I have a question. The people, the women who wanted to leave.
Press the button. Press the button.
So the people who wanted to leave that you tried to convince to stay, what were they opting for? What would they go into? Because that's important to know. Like, what are they choosing as an alternative?
One of them was one of the super bright students, and she was going to do chemistry instead. And another was going to go to a job in industry.
So that was the point I was trying to make, that if you look at chemistry and biology curve for women, it's a whole lot more optimistic and better. So what are they doing better in biology and chemistry? I'd like to know that.
I want to quote my friend Nora Barrow, who's the chair of UConn, and I've had many discussions with her, and Kate Kirby and Pat Demmer, like what are these numbers? You look at these and they never make any sense. And Nora said, physicists, I've told many of this already, physicists are jerks. And I thought, okay, well, let me think about this. And it's exactly what Alex is saying, and Silke is saying, I'm sorry. And you know, when you take certain courses, they encourage you. When you take a physics course, what I found very, very difficult is they try to weed you out. They try to show you how stupid you are. When I was taking my early physics courses, even at Ohio State, you would take your first course in an honors course, and they'd make it so the highest grade was 32% on an exam. It's just not right, right? And I think it just makes it harder. And I also want to say that I think men and women are different, not like this, but like this. And that added with the lack of numbers, just kind of feeds on it. You know, it's just like, I mean, most guys don't want to be weeded out either, but then you have all these other things like, you know, when you're an undergraduate, someone just being nice saying, why would you major in physics? And they're only trying to be nice, yet that's just a little extra burden. So you're running a marathon, and you have 3 extra ounces on each ankle, and at 18 miles you don't notice the difference, but you lose the marathon. And I also want to ask you guys, you stuck around for this? Thank you. So what I also ask for people to do is go back and nominate women for fellowships and awards and medals and things like that, because people just tend to nominate who they know. And if you stop and spend 25 minutes in a room with your friends and think about minorities and women to nominate, I think you would add a lot to the whole outline.
So just sort of moving things slightly differently. Something else that I think is really important is I think increasing the pool of people to whom physics is attractive. So I think, for instance, when we talk about public engagement, I think we have a problem that we're very, very inward looking. I don't think we're engaging broadly enough. So I think that there's 3 different aspects of, or sort of elements of community when we think of diversity. There's among scientists, faculty. One needs diversity among students, and one needs to be reaching broad communities. And I think these 3 are interlinked. I think as in a way where outsider, insider, so we're minorities within physics, which means that we often feel a burden to speak to communities outside more. We feel more passionate about it, more engaged about it, because we are in a way part of communities much broader than physics, more so than the majority of physicists. And when I look at public engagement efforts, they're often very, very insular. And I think they're often physicists not trying to communicate with people outside, but assuming they know enough to themselves be able to appeal to everyone else that's not them. I don't think that is nearly broad enough. I think that another useful aspect of diverse faculty is that they appeal much more to the broader community outside. So after undergraduate in physics, I did an MBA and came back to physics, and why I left physics was I looked around at physicists and they were not appealing. I was like, their whole life is physics. I don't see myself reflected in these people at all. And I don't think the physics community gets that to the outside world. We're not that appealing as a life choice. It's not a community that a lot of people would want to be part of, and why is that? We need to really think about it and think about how it is we would make ourselves an option that is more appealing, how we engage with the broader community in a way that is appealing. I think this is, and in this way attract more diverse students as well. I think this is one of the reasons that students leave. As again, Alex mentioned, you look at physicists around, this is their whole life. And in undergrad, I went to liberal arts undergrad, and I did other things. Physics was maybe half of what I did. I did theater, I did literature, and by the time I came to physics, everyone said, oh, if you're a serious physicist, physics would be all you do. Anything else you do means that you must not be spending enough time doing physics or being a serious physicist. And this is actually a problem, because I think anyone who wants to have a life and do physics is not going to find it encouraging to do this as a career. And so when we engage more broadly, or within ourselves, we really need to think about this.
So you really think that it's very different for fields of biology?
I think we should think about our field right now. I think we should accept the fact we're doing very poorly at diversity and think about how to improve it. I don't think it's they're as bad as us. I think we need to accept the fact we're doing really badly at diversity. We need to think about creatively what we can do.
Right, I just have a question following your comments. Well, we know what the competition for the faculty positions in the US, for example, is. So it's a very cutthroat competition. What you're proposing, I mean, how do you envision making it less so? It's, as long as it's a cutthroat competition, as long as there are 200 people for one position, it's going to be brutal. And it's going to repel some people more than others, and without increasing the number of faculty positions, for example, I just don't see how that can be addressed.
I think it's just the criteria you are setting, right? You have to really carefully consider your criteria for excellence. What is needed to be on a faculty? Is it the number of high-impact papers? Is it the number of papers? What is it? And I think if you just set your criteria correctly, then you will automatically hire more diverse.
I want to add something really important. Assuming that a PhD student, a graduate, is going to go to academia is a pretty big assumption.
Right.
We don't call going into industry or Wall Street or insurance selling with a graduate degree in physics as an alternative career anymore. And so the academics are myopic, and they only tell their students that the only job available is an academic job. And you can look on the APS website, and there's a lot of other things available. And I'm an academic by default. I couldn't keep my job in industry. So,
Laura, you're completely right. And that's been
Sure,
very-
but
I
very
don't. Okay. So I think the fact that it's competitive to get a position in academia does not translate to cutthroat behavior being the best way to get that job in academia. I think for me and for a lot of people, that one doesn't necessarily perform one's best in that cutthroat competitive environment. I don't think we're getting the best scientific output by encouraging people to behave in that combative, aggressive fashion. For me, I don't think that's when I produce the best science, is when I'm being pushed to behave that way. I'm sure that's true for a lot of people. I don't think these two things map onto each other, and I think telling people that they do by being cutthroat and aggressive means you're more likely to get a faculty job. I think that's a disconnect right there.
Well, if it's 1 out of 100, it's going to be cutthroat regardless of what criteria you put in.
That's not accurate. I think that the criteria, what does it take to do original science? Does it take being cutthroat? I don't believe so. I don't think a majority of people believe so. However, I think the number of people left in physics who believe so is disproportionately higher than the people who could have been in physics. I think that's a problem.
Can I jump in here? I think physics is a very small field.
Get closer to the mic.
Physics is a very small field, certainly compared to biology, medicine, chemistry, and there are lots of people who love to do physics, and there are only so many positions. In the U.S., we really don't have many choices. Like in Europe, where you can get a PhD in physics, and you can go do fascinating work in industry. In the U.S., the possibilities have become much more limited now that Bell Labs is no longer there, IBM is not doing the kind of research
Not
that they
true,
did.
right? I mean, the U.S. has all the high-tech
70%.
industries in the world, right?
70% of physicists are in the private sector. 70%. So there's a lot of
industry.
in the private sector. So I don't want to just use industry, because a large fraction even go into economics and other areas
Well,
like that.
that's my point. You're trained to be a physicist, and most of us that are going into physics are going into it because we're fascinated by physics, and we would love to do that. And if you tell your students, okay, you have maybe 10% chance of getting an academic job. Otherwise, you're going to end up in doing economics or being on Wall Street or something else. So why bother spend 10 years and get a PhD? So we are starting out with very, very limited conditions. And the fact that it's such a small field, there's so few resources, you have to fight for grants, you have to fight for jobs, you have to fight to publish. These are the given conditions. I don't think that there's any way for us to change those things. Biology is a much bigger field. For 10,000 participants at the APS March meeting, biology by now has, I think, 20 or 30,000. Chemistry is, again, a much, much larger field. So there are more opportunities there, and maybe it's less cultural than physics is. But I don't know how we can transform our community to suddenly be so nice to everybody and allow someone to be a professor, but they can take half time off too. It just doesn't work this way because
I don't think the point that Silke or I are making is that you're being nice to someone and letting them take time off. The point I'm making is that actually doing other things, having other interests, makes me a better physicist. It's not a concession someone's making to me that, okay, we'll give you this, we'll give you a handicap and allow you to do this other thing. That's not at all the point we're trying to make. The point is that doing just physics is not necessarily the best way to be a physicist, is not the best way to do original research. I can say this for certain for myself. I do better physics when I have a more balanced set of activities and I'm able to spend time doing other things. I'm sure this is true for other people. So I want to be really, really clear about this, that saying people don't need to be cutthroat, saying people don't need to spend 100% of their time doing physics isn't a concession. It's a way of saying this is actually a better way to do physics. In the output that you produce, it's not the number of hours you spend as physicists, actually not just as physicists. In contemporary society, often we think that the number of hours you spend doing something is a way of measuring how productive you are. I think that's the disagreement we're having, that how creative you are or how original you are or the impact of your work is not directly related to how much time you spend doing physics. And we're all creative. This is something we should understand.
Turn it on. Be green.
It
should be green. No, start it up.
Yeah, it's turning off.
Slide it up and it'll turn green.
Sorry. So I agree with what you're saying about the environment, basically, to be accepting for women. But I think the statistics that we saw, I didn't know it, and I think that is a bit worrisome because it's in bachelor's degree that we are losing the students. And I think when people do bachelor's degree, they don't necessarily want to go to do PhD and become academic. But from the beginning, it seems that there is a problem with physics. It is losing its appeal to female students. And why is that? I think that's what we need to discuss right now because, yes, I don't think that all female or all male PhDs don't have to go into academics. I think there is a lot of possibilities there, and we can tell them that from the beginning, we can tell them that's the case so that you can do a very nice PhD and go into industry. And I think it's very good to have physics PhDs in other areas. Everybody should not do academics. That's not the problem. But if we lose students in the bachelor's degree, that is a problem. And I think that maybe comes from teachers, from high school already, to encourage people to do physics, to explain why it's good to do physics. Because I think now maybe there is this idea that it's a bit of old-fashioned science and they can go to other things. Biology is pretty and let's do biology. I don't know, but I think that bachelor's degree students, that's a problem.
I think that's a very good point about bachelor's STEM. I just have a very quick comment. I think that's a very good point about the bachelor versus the PhD. Because a lot of the things that Suchitra and Eva and Silke were saying really pertain to PhDs, and I think it's good to examine why. And also, I don't know if Laura has the data. Is the bachelor's degree in physics also going down for men?
Actually, the number of men getting bachelor's degrees is growing rapidly right now.
Okay, so
And the number of women is growing less rapidly. So that's why the fraction is going down. My favorite theory is the TV show The Big Bang Theory, because we don't know why. Because they're portraying how it's really cool to be Sheldon, but look at the women in there. The women scientists are losers and biologists. So who knows what the influence is? But it's pretty interesting.
That's a really good point.
And I just really want to stress that thinking that a PhD in physics is best to go into academics is a really old-fashioned way to look at it. That's not accurate. And if you go on the APS website, Crystal Bailey has this whole new thing about how you can really find careers, because the academics, the professors don't know how to tell people where to go. And it's not just Intel. There's a whole lot of exciting ways you can do a lot of exciting physics that's not in academics.
Can I make a point? We're here on the Pacific Rim, on the edge of Asia, and we're hearing a very US-centric viewpoint here. And I'd like to hear a little bit about what the challenges are for women in Asia, in Japan, in China, in Taiwan, where I think that the numbers of women PhDs are probably quite a bit smaller than in other parts of the world, and maybe even to get the levels up to the levels they are in Europe or the USA would be something that would be an accomplishment. So I'd like to hear about the Asian perspective, if we could do that.
I think what is striking is that at the end of gymnasium, it's 50-50. And that changes when going to the university. And I would consider that there are social implications. The role of the family in the orientation, in my opinion, plays a role. And it's not the student who decides by himself, well, the student girl who decides by herself that she will not do physics. It might be the influence of the family. So that might depend very much on the country. And that is not so clear for me. So the education at the early days is playing a role in the choices that the people do.
Yeah. Okay. In China, I think there is a very old tradition for the woman. The best woman in a man's mind is you learn nothing, just stay at home, to do the housework. But now the things change a lot. Many girls can go to the university to have the best education. And after graduate from the university, most of the parents would like to their kids to do master degree, to encourage the girls to read for master degree or PhD degree. But the thing is, a number of the girls, they don't like to choose this major because they have to they have to make greater efforts than other majors. For example, in China, the industry developed so fast. So in company, the young people can earn more money than the job in the university or the researcher, like a professor. So I think that's maybe one of the reasons why the number of the female scientists is lower than the men.
Okay, my name is Mei Chao, and I was born in Taiwan, and I went to the US for graduate study, and I spent 30 years in the US and came back 8 years ago. So I've seen both worlds. I think there are a lot of common features and environments too, because right now, I believe at this moment in Taiwan, the percentage of women bachelors in physics is perhaps the same, similar, probably somewhere between 15 to 20%. Okay. Very similar to the situation in the US. Of course, the two societies are quite different because this is still Oriental society, but Taiwan is a lot more westernized than the other, some of the other Asian countries. Okay, so I graduated from the NTU here in the physics department. I was the only girl in that class, graduating class. So when I went to Georgia Tech, I thought in the US it's much better. No, I was the first female faculty member who got tenured there. So probably for 10, 15 years, I was the only female faculty member in the department. So I came back to academic syndicate and I took the director position. I came back that year. I was the only female directors in 31 of them. Okay. So what I would like to say that is, I think it's universal phenomena. It's not, but there are different features. But even in the U.S., I have a daughter who was born in the U.S., grew up in the U.S. education system, and I think the social pressure for girls to go into science is pretty high, because if you're interested in science, you're an outlier. You're not going to go with your best friends to, they have a very different interest there. So I think we have heard a lot of discussions, and there are a lot of features in physics that are gender independent, okay, the competition and everything. But I think what we could do, those are features, it's very, very hard to change. We cannot make physics less cutthroat competitive. That would take probably another 100 years, something. Okay. But what we could do, I believe, is to look at some of the gender-dependent features and see whether we could make some changes there. So my own experience is that since at a lot of places, women students, women's faculty members are really the minority. So they would need some kind of support system because they really don't have that many to go to talk to. So that support system I see at different places. When I was at Berkeley as a graduate student, we have a female graduate student gathering, regular gathering. So in that circles, I could meet other female graduate students in physics, and we kind of exchange ideas and get support or get advice from each other. And at Georgia Tech, some years ago, we started some kind of women in physics. So we have graduate students, undergraduate students together, and they form some kind of social circle. They have regular activities. And at the end, they feel supported, and the atmosphere would change a little bit. So once you got some kind of critical mass, and it's going to, make things much, much easier. So once we hire the second female faculty members in physics, then it's easy to get the third one, easy to get the fourth one. So right now, I believe I Georgia Tech will have like a 5 female faculty at least. That's probably the number I count. So I think that would, from the help, by the help from the department or some conscientious effort, if we build that kind of support group, I think that would really make things much easier. And of course, we can talk about other things. There are other things one could do and to change the overall attitude or something. But that's from my own experience. That's the most helpful one.
Yeah, maybe I can add one point to Liling's point. Actually, when I was working in CAS, Chinese Academy of Science, for 12 years, so we did some statistics about the female, how the ratio of female students in among all the PhD students. This ratio is not bad. It's actually slightly increasing among those 10 years. So now it's about something between 30% to 40%. So it's not that bad. But then if we look at the ratio of female faculties in IOP and to the toppest level and the full professors, but we are doing very, very bad. So for some years, Liling was the only full professor in IOP. And remember, IOP has about 100 full professors, total number, and for maybe 2 or 3 years, Liling was only a female full professor. So then we go back to look at the ratio of female faculties in assistant professor level, in associate professor level, or postdoc level. Then start from bachelor degree, start from the PhD students. It's about 30-something%. It's great. Then this percentage actually going down quite rapidly if you move above to postdoc, assistant professor, associate professor, then full professor. So then this is probably because we only do the statistics within IOP, but IOP is already pretty big. So we have about 300 faculty members, about 700 students. So it's kind of representative statistics for how we are losing females once you move upwards towards the high level of the academia. But then if you look at the situation about 30 years ago, or maybe 40 years ago, when China is doing the communist years, actually the percentage of female professors is much higher than the current situation. So there must be something related to the economics and also related to the social, the public culture. So as you probably know that in the Asian public culture, doing physics is kind of man's job, not very, it's not related to those good words about female, like pretty, charming. It's kind of far away from that. So it's a very interesting phenomenon in the Chinese culture is if a female scientist achieves a great achievement. So for example, she was elected academician, so she would make herself like world famous. So this female scientist was called Miss blah blah blah. Not Madam blah blah or Miss blah blah, but Miss. They call it in Chinese word 先生. Not this word is Miss is in Western culture. It's used to for men. So that actually, people use that. So that means if a female scientist got very successful, you are treated as men. So this is a very bad image for promote science among females. Yeah. So yeah, that's what I'm going to say.
But the 先生, I think it's almost to describe the person who is more have knowledge. I mean ancient, from the ancient.
Right.
Yeah. So the Li Pei or the other who has much of the knowledge we call 先生, but I think it's 中性词汇.
No. But male, every male can be called 先生. But only female, once you achieve great, then you can be called 先生. Then before that, you are not allowed to call 先生.
Yeah. It's from the ancients.
Right.
Yeah.
May I say a few words? I noticed over the past decade or so, I gave talks to various high schools in South Europe and Southeast Asia, including North Asia as well. And I understood two kinds of, the first thing is that cultural difference is there, and it should be respected. And one cannot say that we are all the same, we are all equal, but we are definitely different. Now, second, and more important, I think, is although one cannot change so easily the way the hierarchy works, because one has to probably sometimes employ brutal approaches to that, I realized that talking to high school students, especially girls, that the key question that arose from all the countries that I gave a talk was, what are my opportunities should I get a physics degree? And what are my opportunities should I become a mathematician or a biologist? This question was common from South Europe all the way down to Southeast Asia. And I think this is more important in my opinion. Because if they know what they can get afterwards and how interesting their life can be, then they are more motivated into fighting for it. And culture is a different thing. One cannot say in one country that, how they perceive the housewife or the house husband. But the motivation is another thing. And when a 16-year-old child, male or female, knows exactly what opportunities lie ahead, then they have a good reason to go for it. And I think that's the observation I took over the past 12 to 14 years when giving these talks.
It seems, I totally agree with your point. It seems to me that why are girls dropping out after their bachelor's degree is because they have opportunities that are much more exciting, more money, more available jobs. Biology, for example, what can I do with biology? There's so many exciting things to do, so many job opportunities. In fact, if I were to graduate now, I would go to biology probably. Because the questions are fascinating, there's huge progress in the field, and we have to find ways to motivate young people to do research in physics or to stay in physics.
Dr. maybe I just want to add, if I could, in Singapore, for instance, in the past 8 years, we have seen a rise in the number of girls applying to the school to do physics. But that took work, because they started to realize that having a degree in physics is beyond, they can do things even more than just becoming a professor of physics. But many of them did not know that. Nobody told them before.
So what are can you enumerate the things?
Yeah, I can find it on the APS website. Can I get, so while you guys talk, I'll bring up some of the stuff. Can I get my computer back on this thing?
Oh, yes. So I had, I guess, a question, because as Laura, I think it was Laura that pointed this out, that it's dangerous to speculate about why women and girls with high school at any level are leaving physics, and especially because by the nature of the problem, I mean, I obviously don't know what's driving them to leave physics, but also women who are still in physics aren't the women who left. So, is there any effort to study what, like the women that either, it's hard if they never chose to major in physics at all, because then they're harder to find, but then the women that are like, you know, taking their first year of physics courses and then leaving a physics major and going to do something else, like are they going to biology? Are they leaving science altogether? And you know, asking them sort of what it is that led you to leave. I mean, I suspect it'd be good to do this for both men and women, so you know what the differences are also, and you know, is there some particular thing that makes women want to learn physics versus men?
So you might be able to find that in some of the AAP website statistics, and one of the things that I was finding, this is the global survey of physicists, Women in Physics, the Tale of Women, it's February 2012, and the one that's going to come out will be the Global Survey of Scientists. When you follow these things through, saying women are leaving physics because biology is more interesting, why aren't men leaving physics because biology is more interesting? And the problem is, if you follow any of these directions, it's hard to find a real reason. It really is. So anyhow, as far as professional development,
sorry, just a subset of that question. So I think statistically in the US, there are these numbers, they leave sciences altogether, women and minorities. In Cambridge, they leave physics to do other natural sciences. I can tell you more, but that's just, there are numbers.
I'm not finding it right now, but there's Crystal Bailey put together this tremendous guidebook. So if you want to, I mean, I can, if anybody wants it, I'll find it and I'll send it to you. But there's a huge amount of information. The largest growing unit in APS is the Foreman Industrial and Applied Physics. And so that's, you know, and so there's a lot of, people just aren't aware of it. And I can't find the, anyhow, if you look on here, people will help you find it, but there's a little brochure that you can just download and hand out to your students, and that might help. It's good internationally.
You just skip through job for physicists.
So in terms of in Cambridge, why are women leaving physics and going to other natural sciences? This is kind of interesting. So actually in the first year, women do far worse in physics and this seemed absurd to me. So I had this conversation with the director of teaching about we should be doing something. Why are women doing far worse, like way beyond statistical significance? And I got this response like, well, it's known women are less confident and our course is very fast paced, so maybe it's better for them to do a different natural science. I actually think this is not so uncommon. It's really shocking. I could not believe he actually said that, I guess, overtly instead of just thinking it. I think that is related to this weeding out idea, and I think, so I continued having this conversation, and this is the idea that in physics, the main idea is to weed people out, and if you can't keep up, then you should just do another natural science. I think that's a large part of, obviously, if they get this, if that's how you feel, that is going to be communicated to students, and I think that's one of the reasons why I think they might leave and do another natural science, where it's not as much, if you can't keep up, leave, it's not as weeding out as physics.
Sorry, can you switch on the mic?
What is the enrollment rate in physics for bachelor's degree for women compared to men? I mean, from the beginning, are they 50-50 or they are like 20%, 80%, and then?
Less than, no, it's more than 20% for enrollment. The numbers, I don't remember the numbers. You have to go on the AAP website, but up until a few, but that was, people were getting bachelor's degrees. And you're asking about enrollment versus losing degrees. So what has been found for many, many years is that the number of women in physics just The percentage just keeps going down in the linear rate year after year after year. I don't have the actual numbers, but you can find it on AAP Statistical Center website. The only thing that's happened recently is that the number of women getting PhDs is going down. As far as I know, the number of women entering as physics majors, I don't know the numbers that has changed. So, it might be.
No, because for example, in our PhD program, when we started, we were only 3 women, you know. So 1 fall off, so she didn't finish the PhD, and 2 continued. But if we take the same, I think in the male side, there were more drop-offs.
Yeah, no, you do find that more women drop out of undergraduate programs than men do. I mean, that's just that standard leaky pipeline thing.
Yeah.
I just don't know what the numbers are right now since this change has
disproportionately
happened.
dropping off. It's not the same percentage. I don't know exactly the numbers, but it's disproportionate.
So, Christoph, here's the brochure I was looking for, and I'll be happy to send it to you. I just couldn't find it on the website with all the pressure of being up here. APS is working really, really hard to look at this. Another thing that I've noticed is I've done these coach workshops all over the world for empowering young people or women, career launch in physics, etc. And it is so dependent upon culture. I was really shocked how if I go into many of these Muslim countries, whether it's Oman or Ghana or Morocco, Indonesia, you find that the fraction of women in science and engineering is more than 50%. And these women don't feel, all these hijab, shrouded women, don't feel at all that they're having any problem in the workplace. And then you go into other cultures, and you find that depending on the culture, it's really a challenge. And when you go talk about mentoring, if you're in India or if you're in Oman, you better be really careful and let the locals talk about what the best way to mentor is, because if you start imposing what Americans do, you basically get your throat taken out. So it's really interesting. So I think opening the discussion international is really important. Anybody have any other comments they want to make or suggestions?
So do you have an idea why that is in Muslim countries women feel more comfortable doing physics?
No. All I know
maybe
is that
I can say something about, we're talking about international, about France, that we had to discuss with Eva, that in France, work-life balance is in general better. I mean, we have more holidays, more free time. That's true for everyone, men and women. So we still have about, I think CNRS, I just looked it up, there's 20% women researchers in physics, 35% altogether for all disciplines, and 20% in physics. So it's not very different. Even though I'm not saying the competition is less, I mean, there is still competition, but there is better work-life balance. So I'm not sure that the competition by itself is really the reason for having too few women. I mean, but work-life balance, in my opinion, is important. I would never give it up. I mean, not for a Nobel Prize.
Still trying to figure out how to do it.
So the sort of idea of like the climate of physics, like at all levels, has come up a bunch of times, and I think that this is a problem we have for everyone in physics. And then I think that these sorts of things, like if you're in kind of a negative climate, if you already otherwise feel isolated, then all these things are worse for women and minorities. And so but if we examine these as a community, then this is going to be better for all of us. There's a guide on the archive, hold on, I'm going to read it out correctly, called LGBT plus Inclusivity in Physics and Astronomy, a Best Practices Guide. And it's really great, very easy to read, not full of jargon. And one of the things that struck me reading it there is oh wow, a lot of these are good ideas we should have been doing for a long time. They will certainly help trans people or other sexual minorities, but these are things we should have been doing a long time because they're just good ideas. I think that's something that, I mean, in worst case scenario, it doesn't help women at all, but it help women specifically, but it does help all of us, which is not a bad thing.
Is there another question here?
So I would like to suggest that this is a gathering of people who are familiar with order parameters and emergent behavior. And it seems to me that these climate issues and are real at all levels. And I think that Alex's comments at the very beginning, were very to the point. And then you can ask why are these apparently less effective in deterring males than females? And then I think I might come to, I don't know how to connect this to the Middle Eastern countries, but at least in the Western climate. I think that the kind of order parameters for males and females are rather different in the cultures, at least that I'm familiar with. So males are expected to be capable of withstanding competition, and they're expected to somehow put up with all this stuff. I'm a beta male and not an alpha male, so I too have been sensitive to some of these kinds of issues throughout my career. But I'm also sort of feel the pressure to grit my teeth and bear it. I think it's rather the opposite for females, that the gender stereotype is to not be competitive and not do all this stuff. So the response, I think, of the sexes are kind of channeled, if I would say, by the culture expectations that we have. And these are really hard to fight against because these are order parameters. It's not easy to mess up with superconductivity when you're far below the transition temperature.
Change the temperature.
So yeah, I think that's part of the struggle, and why when we talk about it, we don't come to easy solutions because you're really struggling against some kind of cooperative behavior that's built into our societies. And similarly, the issue of climate within physics, that's another order parameter, and it extends all the way down to the high school teachers. They were trained by physicists too. It's just there at all levels, whether you like it or not. And how do you bust up an order parameter? That's what you're really talking about.
Slowly, idiomatically, and okay, quickly, because I was told we
Still,
have
the
to
question
finish.
is, I mean, I agree with everything that was said, but why is it different in chemistry? Yeah.
So,
and put under the same pressure, same competitiveness, and women do much better there.
These are great questions. We're going to have to wind down, and that's a standard question that comes up. And we can continue at dinner. But I think what we've seen is broader careers, changing the climate, the LGBTQ and the women in physics and the minorities in physics. Those help everybody in physics. And so I think right now we're adiabatically putting things on the table, trying to change these order parameters. And let's bring this all back to our own institutions. And next year, let's have another discussion at ICANN and also bring more information. And I think we have to close because the animal's eating the wires. Okay. Thank you for your